So welcome back, coders. So we never stop coding. Now let's go. Now in this tutorial, I'm going to be talking about ES6. Now ES6, you might have heard of it. It's some version of JavaScript, or it's called ECMAScript 6. So now in this ECMAScript 6, I'm going to talk about today. We're going to talk about classes. Now how do you create classes in JavaScript? So to create a class in JavaScript, if you're familiar with Java or you're familiar with Python, you would know how to create classes if you know how to do object-oriented programming. Now, to create a class in JavaScript, use the keyword class. So I'm going to create a car class. Then, in the car class, I'm going to define my constructor. Now, for those who don't know what a constructor is that function that is run when the class is just created. Initially, when the class is just created, the constructor is run. So, the constructor, in this case, it's going to be taking in a name. Now, when it takes in the name, I'm going to set this name, this.brand, to equal to name. So the person will pass in the name, and then this name, I will pass it into the variable brand. Now, this variable, it refers to the class which I'm working on. So this .brand is bound to the class which I'm working on. So that is how you create a class in JavaScript. Now, to make a new class, like to run the class, what I can do, I can say const. So I can say const my car. Then it will equal to new car. Then the type which I'll pass in will be Ford. That will be the name of the car, Ford. So maybe here, when the class is initially made, I'm going to say maybe console.log the name. So when the class is initially created, the constructor will be run. And when the constructor is run, let's console.log name. Now, in this case, I'm going to be using Node to run my JavaScript. So if you have Node installed, you just type Node, then the name of your file. Now, the name of my file is tut.js. So when I run it, you can see that it has outputted for me Ford. It has console.log for me Ford. So now, how do you create methods in classes? So a method is like a function in a class. So let's create a function in a class. To create a function in a class, simply what I do, I say the name of the function which I want to create, which is present. Then in the present function, let's say I want to console.log some text, maybe. The text which I want to console.log is I. It goes like I. Sorry for that. So let's first delete this. The text I want to console.log is I have a. Then I concatenate with this dot brand. Now, every time you want to access a variable that is bound to the class like brand inside a method or a function inside the class, you use the this keyword, this then dot brand. So now here, when let me clear, then I run my code, node.the name, then you can node.the name, you can see that nothing has been printed. Why has nothing been printed? We have not called this function present. So to call this function present, you come down my car.present. Then in this case, you have now called the present variable. The present method. So since you have called the present method, when we run, you can see that now the I have a Ford has been printed out onto our screen. Now, what else can we talk about in classes? We can talk about class inheritance. Now, what is class inheritance? Class inheritance is simply another function inheriting another function. Another class inheriting another class, which means that the class that is inheriting the other class takes all of its methods and all of its variables into it. So let's create we have our car class. Now let's create a new class. Let's cross the class, then we call it model. Now, the class model, it's going to inherit from car. So to do inheritance in JavaScript, we use the keyword extends. Now it extends from car, which means that it's going to inherit from car. Then we do our constructor, which is the function that is run immediately the class is created. And then the function will take in name and then mod. So now remember, we have to we have to set the variable for the car class. This variable that it needs, the name variable, we need to set it. So to set it, we use super. Now what super refers to? Super refers to the class that has been inherited. So we use super. So when I call super, and then I'll pass in name. So it means that this class that I'm inheriting from will be called with reference to the keyword super, and then the name will be passed into it. So after that, I'll say this dot model will equal to mod. This dot model will equal to mod. Let's say that. Let me terminate. This dot model will equal to mod. Now I have made my class that has inherited, my class model which has inherited from car. Now let's create a new class, show. A new method called show. Now this method show, it's just going to console.log something onto the screen or print something onto the screen. So let's say show. Then I'm going to say console.log. So what it's going to console.log will be, let me copy here, to console.log this.present. Now you can see that in this class that we have defined, there is no present method. So where is this present method coming? It's coming from the car class. It means that this model class has inherited or taken up everything from the car class, including its methods and its variables. So it has taken it. That's why I'm able to call this dot present. Now this refers to the class which I'm working on, which is the model class. But remember, the model class has inherited everything from the car class. Then I can say this dot model, which I have defined there. Then I can save. Then I can create my my car. So I can say const my car will equal to new. Now in JavaScript, wherever you are creating a new class, you need to use the new keyword. But in if you are using Python, you would not need to use new, but in JavaScript you need to use new. So we say model. And the model I'm going to pass in is I will pass in Ford. Then I will pass in Mustang. Then I will say my car dot show, meaning that I'm going to call the show method. So when I come here to my command prompt and then I run my file, you can see that the code has been run here, that unidentified, it is a Mustang. Now the question is, why is it showing me unidentified? So if you could pause the video and try to figure out why it is showing me unidentified. So if you have figured out what it was meaning by identified, then you're okay. But if you have not yet figured out, this was what the problem was. If you look at the present function, it's not returning anything. So it's returning something unidentified. So to make the present function return something, instead of doing console.log, I can say return. Then it will return I have dash this brand. So when I run, and I see ls here, and I run my function, you can see now it has returned back this, the unidentified has disappeared, and it has showed I have a Ford, it is a Mustang. So that is how you do class inheritance. So in simple terms, in ES6, this is how you do classes in ES6 in simple terms. So ES6 is not that complicated, it's just an extension of JavaScript to make it more robust. But that is it. Thank you for watching. Keep on coding, never give up, continue coding. So welcome back, coders. Keep on coding, never give up. Now here we are going to be talking about arrow functions. Now what is an arrow function? Initially in JavaScript, the old way of writing functions, let me even write it here. The old way, this is the old way. Now the old way, you can still use it in normal JavaScript, but the new way of using arrow functions has some benefits, and I'll show you later on the benefits that it has. So this is the old way of writing a function. If I wanted to write a function hello, I would say hello is equal to function, then if this function is returning hello, and I can run my function hello. So to run my function, so I will say console.log. Then in the console.log, I'll pass in hello. Then inside the parentheses to execute my function. Then when I run here my code, you can see that it has printed out hello world. So this is the old way of running functions in JavaScript. Now, when you're using an arrow function, the new way, arrow function, let's put it new way, arrow function. So the new way to do it, we'll say hello is equal to, then you open your brackets, then is equal to, you say equal sign, then the equal sign you put a forward arrow, then you can open your those other brackets there. So then you can also return now hello world. Maybe I can say hello world. No, let me say hello world 2. No. Let me write that hello world 2, and I can save. So this is the new way of writing functions in JavaScript, the arrow functions. So now let me console.log, and then I execute the hello function. So when I console.log hello function, and then I run the code, you can see that hello world 2 has been printed out. So this is the new way of doing it. Now, what if there's a shorter way of doing it? Arrow functions returning a value by default, meaning that it just returns that value by default. So to do that, let me do that. Then let me. Now the other way for an arrow function to return a value by default, you say hello is equal to the brackets equal sign that, then you just put in hello. You just put in hello world. Then I'm going to put in 3 hello world 3. So this is how you could return a value by default using the arrow functions. So it means that if I console.log, then I execute my hello function, it should also give me the same result. So you can see hello world 3. Now, the arrow functions with parameters. So let me remove that. Then let me come here. Arrow functions with parameters. Now to work with an arrow function with parameter, I can say hello is equal to the brackets. Now my parameter will go into these brackets, maybe name, right? Then I'll say equal to. Then I will say hello plus name. Then I will terminate. Meaning that if I console.log hello and then I execute my hello function, it needs a variable to go inside. So the variable would be the name. So the name I'll pass in will be Henry without vowels. So when I execute my code, you can see it has sent back hello Henry. I could put here a space to make the code much cleaner. And then when I execute, you can see it has sent back hello Henry. So that is arrow functions with parameters. Now let's talk about arrow functions without parentheses, meaning that if you forget the parentheses, this parentheses here. But when you forget the parentheses, it can only work when you forget the parentheses. It means that you are going to put in a what? You're going to put in a variable. That's when you can be able to forget the parentheses. So you can say hello, but this can only work when the variable is 1. So you can say hello name, then arrow function, your arrow function, then you can pass in hello space, then plus name, then you can terminate. Meaning that if I run my function and then I put in a name, Joseph, without the vowels, then I clear here, then I run the code, you can see it has brought back hello Joseph. But in this case, I've missed out the parentheses. Now that is how arrow functions work. But now what is the use of arrow functions? Arrow functions, they come in handy when you are dealing with usually classes, which class is bound to which class and which class calls which class. So in regular functions, the this keyword represented the object that called the function. It means that the this keyword would represent the object that called the function, which that object could be maybe the window object, the document object, or a button or whatever. But with the arrow function, this keyword, it always represents the object that defined the arrow function. It means that if the arrow function is defined in a certain, it's defined in a certain object, the this keyword would be represented by that particular object. Now this could not be making sense, but we can we can do an example and see how it works. Now to do the example, I want you to create a new file. Create a new file. Come here, create a new file, and then save it as maybe index.html. So I'm going to do my HTML to make my to put on this code. Now after that, we should go down here at before body here, head, come here, and then we are going to create our script. So the script we shall create, let's create its script, and let's close the script, and then let's create a class inside this script. So the class, we're going to call it header, and then we're going to pass in our constructor in the class. Let me pull this code somewhere up. We're going to pass in our constructor, so I can remove that and then expand that. Our constructor in the class, constructor. And then the constructor is going to have a variable color. So I'll say this dot color will equal to red. Then it's going to have a function called change color. Now this function can be defined two ways. You can define it the old way, or you can define it using an arrow function. And both ways of defining it usually determines how the function is bound. So we can maybe define it as change color will equal to function brackets that. Then what it's going to do is simple. This is what the function is going to do. It's going to call document.getElement by id demo.inner HTML, and then it's going to pass in this. It means that this object will be printed onto our web page. So now we need an element with an ID of demo. So to make an element with an ID of demo, we can come here and maybe put a paragraph. Then we give the ID of the paragraph to be demo, and then we can close the paragraph. So it means that this object will be put into our paragraph. Now we are going to check. We're going to check and see how both ways of defining the function affects which function it is bound to. So now I'm going to put in the logic of how we are going to see this. So after defining your class, come down here, and then down here we're going to say the window object calls the function. So when the window object, so I'm going to say the window object calls the function. So we're going to add an event listener. So let me just copy the code here and then add it here. So window.add event listener load, then my header.change color. So the event listener will wait when the window loads. This window object is the one that is going to call this function. It's going to call this function inside the header object. So now, since this is the original way of defining functions inside objects, this function will be bound to the window function. It will not be bound. It will be bound to the window object or the window class. It will not be bound to the header class. But if you use an arrow function, the arrow function would be bound on the what? Header. Would be bound on the header class, regardless of which object or which class calls it. But in this case, since this is not an arrow function, and since the window object is the one that has called it, it's the one that is going to call it immediately the window loads, then it's going to be bound to the window object. That's why this keyword will be bound to the window object instead of being bound to the class to the class header. So then again, we're going to have a button. So let me just copy the code to save time here. Copy, and let's come down here. No, it's not it. Let me copy it properly. Copy, then let me come and paste it here. So we're going to have a button on our page. Now this button is going to have an event listener. So now in this case, when I click the button is going to have an event listener. then it's going to call this function myHeader. Now, when I click the button, the object that is going to call this function myHeader.changeColor is the document object. It means that this keyword will be bound to the document object, because we are not using the arrow function. But the arrow function will only be bound to the header class, and whatever function, whatever object calls it, it will not be bound to that object, if that makes sense. So now this is going to be a button that calls the change color function, but this is the document object that is going to call it. So now we have to create our button. We have to create our button with the ID btn, and it has, maybe it shows click me. So we can come here and create our button, and then we can save. So then let me go to my desktop. Let me go to, where is that folder, ES6, and then let me open this file with Brave. Open with Brave. So Brave will open it. So we shall have here click me. So then wait, let's have a paragraph ID demo. Copy. Let's first look at this code properly. Paragraph ID demo. Save, and let's go back here. Refresh, click, refresh. So the problem why the code is not running is because I forgot to initialize my class. So I should say const myHeader will equal to new, then I'll put new header, then I can save. So I can go back to my file here, refresh it, object window. When I refresh it, you can see object window. So immediately the window loads. This window object is the one that calls this function. That's why here we have that it is the object window that called that function. It is bound to this. So now when I come back here and I click here, you can see that it is the object HTML button element that called that function. So that the function is now bound to the object HTML button element. It's bound to it. So every time I click, it's bound to it. Now what if I used the arrow function? So let me use the arrow function here. So I save. Now let's go back to Brave. You can see that initially with the normal function, it is the object window that first called it. So when I refresh here, you can see that it is our object, this new object that I created, header, that actually it's the one that called it. Or it's not the one that called it, but this keyword is bound to it. It's not bound to anything else, it's bound to it. So even though I click here, our button object will not be able to, will not be bound to this keyword in the header class. So even though I click, you can see it's always bound to the object. So that is the difference between the arrow function and then the normal function. But that's how both of them work. If you understood, thank you for watching, and continue coding. Never give up, continue coding. Welcome back, coders, and never stop coding. So now here we are going to talk about ES6 variables. Now initially, before ES6 was released, there was one way of defining variables, and that was var. So you could only define a variable using var. So if you had var name, I'll put Henry, you could only define variables using var. But after that, there were two other ways of defining variables. There was let. So you'd have var let will equal to Henry. Let's put Henry again. Then also there was another way of const. There was const, so you could use const Henry. No, const Henry will equal to Henry. So here we cannot use let because let is a keyword. We can put name, then here we can use let, then here const, we can also put here name, not Henry. So these are the two new ways of defining variables that was created with ES6. But what is the difference between var, let, and const? Now let's first talk about var. Var, if you use var outside a function, it belongs to the global scope. It means that someone can access var anywhere in the code. So it belongs to the global scope. Now if you use var inside a function, it belongs to that function. It means that outside that function, someone cannot access var. If you use var inside a block, like a for loop, now the types of blocks you can have maybe is a for loop or a while loop, the variable is still available outside the block. It means that if I created a variable when I was in a for loop, it means that after the for loop is done, the variable will still be accessed. Someone can access it outside the for loop. So that's why they say var has a function scope, not a block scope. It means that it can work outside a block. It means that after the block is done, what var will still be available, but it has a function scope because it can only be used in the function. Now when you use let is the block, it's like the block scoped version of var, and is not limited to block, to the block. Var is not limited to the block. I mean var is limited. Var is not limited to the block, but let is limited to the block. It means that if I had a for loop and then in the for loop I used let, after the for loop is done, I cannot access whatever variable I defined in let. So let has a block scope. It means that it can only work in a block, and after the block is done, you can no longer access it. Now let's go to const. Const also has a block scope. Now the keyword const it's usually a bit misleading, and it does not define a constant value. It defines a constant reference to a value. It means that when I use let, it doesn't mean that I'm defining a constant value. It defines a constant reference to a value. It means that if I defined a list of words, let's say that p. Now this doesn't mean that I cannot change any value inside here. I can change the values inside here, but I cannot add anything on. Like I cannot add maybe a new something inside here, because the references created are constant. You cannot change the references created. So the reference to the array created is usually constant. Now because of this, you cannot reassign a constant value, reassign a constant array, but you can reassign the values inside the array or the elements. You cannot reassign a constant object, but you can change the elements of a constant array and change the properties of a constant object. That's something you can do with const. So these are the new types of variables in ES6. And thank you for watching. Continue coding, never give up. So welcome back, coders, and continue coding and never give up. Now, today we're going to talk about array methods, ES6 array methods. So these are methods that you can run on an array. So let's imagine we have an array. Let's call it const my array. Let's call it const my array. And this array has a number of fruits in it. Say fruits. And let's say down in the code I wanted to change, maybe make all these fruits plural. How would I do that? I could use an array method map. So let's do const. Now this array method map, what it does, it goes through each value in the array which I've passed to it, and then it picks each value and puts it into the function which I'm going to pass to it, and then it will return for me a new array which is updated. So let's say my new array which I want it to return to, I'm going to call it my list, and then I'll call my array. Then on my array I'm going to run on it a method map. Now inside the method map I am going to do my arrow function. Item will equal arrow function, and then what I want to return is item plus, I want you to add an s at the end. Then I want to console.log my list. I want to console.log my list. So I can run here my code, and you can see that my array has been made plural into apples, bananas, oranges. Now the question is, how is this map function working? So the way the map function is working is simple. I'm passing a function into this map function. Okay, now this arrow function may be a bit confusing. So let me remove it here. And let me just create a new function. Let me create a function here. So I'm going to call it function. I'm going to call it function. Then I'm going to call it plural. Then in the plural, it should take in an item. And then it should return maybe the item plus yes. So that's what it should return. This is what the function should return. So inside the map function, I need to pass in an item. So this is what we call a higher order function. So I'll pass into a map. Map is a higher order function. So then I'll pass into plural. Then I'll run the code again and see if I'm getting the same output. You can see I'm getting the same output. But the other function which I initially put was an arrow function, a shorter way of defining a function. But you could define the function like this, plural, map. Then I pass in map. Or let's give an example. There's also another array function. But usually when you're dealing with React, you'll mostly use map functions. But in this case, let me give you another function, which is filter. So what filter does this. You pass inside filter a function. Since filter is a higher order function. A higher order function is a function that takes in a function as an argument. That's what a higher order function is. So let's say filter. So let's say the filter function, I'm going to name it G, which means greater. Then I'm going to say than. Then I'm going to put greater than. Then I'm going to put 5. So then I'm going to put here my function, passing the function greater than 5. Now what filter does, you pass in a function, then that function will take in an element from the from the array, do some processing on the element. Then what the filter function will wait and see, has this function returned to me true? If the function returns to me true, I keep that element which I passed into the function. If the function returns to me false, I reject that element. So what I will do, I will say, okay, fine. What the function does, it will take in an element, then it will check if the element, let's call it item, dot length, if the element dot length is less than or equal to 5, what I should do, let me return true. Let me tell the filter function, keep this item, and then put it into for me a new list. So then let me run my code again. You can see that it has only kept one item, which is apple. Apple is the only item whereby its length is 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 5. Banana, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is 6. But what if I remove this and then I keep banan, and then I run the code again? You can see that I now have 2 items which are less than or equal to 5. So that's how the filter function works. So there are other higher order functions, but I'm going to only talk about map and filter. They're usually the most important array methods. So thank you for watching. Keep coding and never give up. So welcome back, coders. Keep on coding, never give up. Now we're talking about destructuring. Destructuring means, for example, if I have an array here with Mustang, F150 and Expedition, and I want to destructure it, which means I want to remove individual elements from it. The old way of doing that, you would have to use their indexes. So this is index 0, this is index 1, this is index 2. So you'd pick each index, and that's how you would destructure the array. But with ES6, there's a new way of destructuring the array. So to destructure an array in ES6, let's call it the new. I want to use small letters, new way. So the new way of doing it, I would say const. Then I would open my brackets. Then I would put car, truck, and I would put SUV. Then I would say let it equal to vehicles. So what will happen is that these vehicles, each variable would be put into these different variables. Car const. So car will equal to Mustang, truck will equal to F150, and SUV will equal to Expedition. So these vehicles will be put into these variables. So this is the new way of destructuring in ES6. But this new way of destructuring in ES6, it is position based. It means that if maybe I never wanted to put truck, I never wanted to pick out truck, I could not just remove truck and leave it like this. No. what would happen is that car would be put into Mustang. Now F150, instead of going into truck, it will be put into SUV, and expedition will be put into nothing. But the other way you could do it, if you wanted SUV to be given into expedition here, what you could do, instead of putting the truck variable, you could just leave it blank and then put a comma, then leave nothing here, then another comma, SUV. It means that car would be Mustang, then F150 would be ignored, then SUV expedition will be put into that variable. So that is in what destructuring arrays. But also destructuring could be useful in functions. So let me show you how it's useful in functions. What if I had a function that does a calculation and then returns an array? So usually the function should return an array. Let's have this function, calculate, takes in a, b, const add, then subtract, and then it returns for me an array. So if I wanted to access each of those values, I would have to use the old way. I would have to use define each index and then access each of those values. But with this structuring, I could just say const. Then I would open my array brackets, and then I would open my array brackets after const, meaning that I'm going to define each variable, add, subtract, multiply, divide, and then I will just equal it into the function, calculate, then I would pass 2 into the function. It means that this array which this function is going to return will be destructured and then put into each of these individual variables. It means that outside here, I can just console.log, I can console.log, let's say the add value, let's say add. Let me save, let me come here and do that. You can see 6 has been printed. If you add 4 plus 2 is 6, or maybe I could console.log the subtract value. So do CLS, the subtract value, you can see the subtract value is 2. So that is how you could destructure. You could destructure an array that has been returned by a function. So thank you for watching. Keep on coding and never give up. So hello coders, never give up coding and continue coding. Now we're going to talk about today the spread operator in ES6. Now the spread operator is just an operator that can quickly copy one array into another array. So let's give an example. We have two arrays here, numbers 1 and numbers 2. So let's create a new array. So I'm going to call it const. I'm going to say const. Then the new array, I'm going to call it number combined. Then it will equal to. Now I could copy the spread operator is just 3 dots. Then I could say number 1. So it would copy number 1 into the array number combined. Then I would also copy again 3 dots. Then I would put number 2. So it would copy number 2 into that array. Then I can console.log to see if everything is going okay. Console.log. Then I could console.log number combined. Save. Come here. Run the code. And you can see that my new array number combined is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Because I have copied numbers 1 and numbers 2 into the new array number combined. So now the other way you could use the spread operator, you could use it in conjunction with destructuring. So let's give an example of how you could use it in conjunction with destructuring. Let's say I have an array of numbers 1 through 6. Now I wanted to destructure this array into new variables. What I could say const, right? Then I would open my destructuring array. So I would say 1. Means that this first one would be destructured into 1. Now I would put another variable 2. It means that this second one will be destructured into 2. Then I could say, fine, let the rest of them be destructured into this variable called rest. So then I would say equal to numbers. So when I print, not print, it's console.log. Remembering Python, console.log. When I console.log rest, this rest of these numbers which are not 1 or 2 will be put into the rest variable. It means that 3, 4, 5 will be put into the rest variable. So when I run this code, I can see that 3, 4, 5, and 6 have been put into the rest variable. So the spread operator can be used like that also for destructuring. Okay, now, but also we can use the spread operator with objects. So you could ask, how would you use the spread operator with objects? Okay, let's give my example, 2 objects. Let me copy here 2 objects. I have these 2 objects. My first object is my vehicle, and my second object is update my vehicle. So this one has brand, it has model Mustang, and then it has color red. This one has type car here 2021, and then color it has yellow. So how I could use the spread operator here, I could maybe make a new variable, const, and then I'm going to call it my updated. I'm going to call it my updated. Let me call it vehicle. My updated vehicle. Then I would open my my object brackets. Then I would use my 3 dots, and then I would say my vehicle to copy my vehicle into this new object that I'm creating. Then I will also use 3 dots again. Then I would copy into update my vehicle. So when I console.log my updated vehicle, let me console.log that. Console.log my updated vehicle. When I console.log that, let me CLS that, and then let me copy. When I console.log that, you can see my new object. It has brand, model, color, type. Yeah, but here you can see the color is yellow, but here the color was red. So when you copy 2 objects into a new object using the spread operator, and then they have similar keys, so this brand is a key, model is a key, color is a key, then Ford is a value, Mustang is a value, yellow is a value. So if they have similar keys, the last one to be copied into the new object, the last similar key to be copied into the new object, it's its value that will be taken and then put into the new object that you have created. So that is how you could use the spread operator in objects. You could use the spread operator when you're doing destructuring, or you could use the spread operator when you want to copy one list into another list. Thank you for watching. Continue coding and never give up. So welcome back, coders. Never give up coding and continue coding. Now we are going to be talking about here modules, how to do modules, or to write code in another file and import it into another file. So let's assume this is our main file. It's called tut.js, and then let's create a new file. Let's call it person.js. Now there are 2 ways of exporting some files from exporting files to another, exporting some code from another file to another file. There's the default way of doing it, and then there is the what? They call it usually the inline way of doing it. So let's use the inline way of doing it. What if in my person.js I have the following variables. I have, let's say, a const variable, const name will equal to, maybe the name should be Henry, and then maybe const age, and the age should be maybe 100. So then we would like to export these 2 variables. So to export it, we'll just do export, then we open our brackets like this, then we put name, then we put age. This is one way of exporting it. Or instead of exporting it this way, what we could do, we could delete that, and then on each line here we'll just put export. Then we would have exported it. So this is inline exporting. So there's also another way, the default way of doing some export. So you can create a new file, and then you can call it messages, and let's call it messages.js. Now in the messages.js, let's create a new function. So to save time, I'm just going to paste the function. So this is the function message. It has a const name, a const age, and then it returns name is age plus years old. So now to export this function, I could do export default, then I would put the message. So these are the two ways of exporting things from files to be imported into another file. But these two ways of exporting, it makes they also have different ways of importing. So if you have this first one and wanted to import the files into another file from this first one, the way we would import it would be import, then we use our brackets here, name, then export, name, bracket, comma, export, then we say from, open our bracket slash, then you put your URL to where the file is, person.js. Now this is way of importing when you export this way. Now what if you export this way? There's a different way of importing it. So in this case, you would just say import message from, then you would say messages.js. This is the different way of importing. So this is how you can import and export things from files. So thank you for watching. Keep on coding and never, ever, ever give up coding. Thank you for watching. So welcome back, coders, and never ever give up coding. Continue coding. Okay. We're going to talk about ternary operators in ES6. Now, usually the previous one wanted to write logic, you would just use the if statements. You would use if statements. But in this case, there's a shorter way of writing logic instead of using if statements. So how does that work? So what you can do, let's make a new variable. Let's call it let auth. Let's call it let auth. And then let the auth be maybe true. It means that we have run some code previously up, and then it has sent for us back auth to be true. So what you can do, you can say auth. Then maybe there's a variable here. Let's call it, no, there's a function. Let's make a function, not a variable. Let's call it function. And the function be allow. And then it takes in the message. Let's call it msg. And then it console.logs whether we have been allowed or not. We have been authenticated or not. So let's say console.log msg. That's the message. So then we can use our ternary operator. So let me call it the T operator. The T operator. So to use the T operator is simple. I can say auth and then question mark, right? So after the question mark, the first part here will be if it is true. If the auth is true, what should I do? I should say allow. Then the message I should pass in is authenticated. Authenticated. But if it is false, if auth is false, what I should pass in is, the function I should allow is, I should run allow, but I should say not authenticated. Authenticated. Not authenticated. So I can now run my file. To run my file, I use node.js. You can see it has passed for me authenticated because my auth is true. But let's say my auth is false. It's not true. It's false. Let's say false. So if my auth is false, then I run, you can see it has passed for me not authenticated. So this is how you use the ternary operator. So thank you for watching and never ever give up coding. Continue coding. Thank you so much.